The Checkpoints is presented by pharmaceutical company GM Pharma.
Mr. Jonas, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Elene, for inviting me.
The big question for me and probably for the audience is how will the U.S. sanctions work and the U.S. sanctions on Bidzina Ivanishvili? I want to focus this interview around him and what these sanctions prompt Bidzina Ivanishvili and the Georgian Dream to do.
Yeah. So if you were to look at only this very short one-page order that imposed the sanction on Bidzina Ivanishvili, you would not understand how these sanctions work, why they affect him, why they affect his deposits or money that he has in Europe. You have to follow a very complicated chain of regulations and orders that have been issued after. The bottom line, without going into a long history of all of this stuff, the bottom line is that the executive order and the subsequent orders are directed at individuals and companies anywhere in the world who are helping the Russian military industrial complex and base. That's one group. And they are also directed at anybody who is acting to help Russia to undermine democracy, to undermine elections, involved in corruption, human rights violations that benefit Russia. So what the United States did was it classified Bidzina under this executive order as a person who is helping Russia to undermine democracy in Georgia, human rights violations that are for the benefit of Russia. So he is seen as and is defined as a person who is helping Russian foreign policy. And in addition, the law was amended so that, at a later point, to the executive order, so that whether a person is directly helping the Russian military-industrial complex by selling missiles to them, for example, or parts like North Korea or Iran or China, that also anybody who is, again, helping foreign policy in these ways is banned from doing business with foreign financial institutions, such as Credit Suisse, such as Julius Baer. And a person can say, well, how can the U.S. issue a law that bans Credit Suisse or Julius Baer from doing business with Bidzina Ivanishvili or paying him money? And the answer is it does it by a threat of punishment. It says that if any foreign financial institution pays money or transfers money or does business transactions with a person who is sanctioned under this anti-Russian executive order, that bank will have its assets frozen in the United States, will have its accounts closed in the United States. So Credit Suisse, and now Julius Baer, which has come up,
would not risk to do that.
Yes, I mean, they have billions and billions of dollars of business in the United States, U.S. clients, U.S. assets, U.S. subsidiaries, their offices of these banks in the United States. And so if they pay Bidzina Ivanishvili $1, then they will violate the U.S. sanction because he's covered by that sanction, and then they will be punished by having their assets seized in the United States. So that's the way it works. A lot of people are misled because the order, if you read just this little simple one-page order, it seems to be talking about his investments in the United States and assets in the United States.
That was my question, because we hear that, you know, it won't affect Bidzina Ivanishvili as severely because he doesn't have any assets in the U.S.
Yeah, so that's true. So the main impact of this kind of an order is to get at assets in the United States. But the order goes further than that and blocks also foreign bank transactions with a person who is covered by this sanction. And again, it doesn't block it directly. What it says is Credit Suisse, if you pay him that money that actually they do owe him, okay? I mean,
yes, you know, because he won
these cases, and he won these cases fair and square. And as much as I hate to admit it, he had, you know, Credit Suisse stole his money. I mean, or the guy at Credit Suisse stole his money. And that is why Bidzina Ivanishvili has won every instance in the Singapore courts and in the Bermuda courts, which are very credible and reputable courts. So, you know, he won that money fair and square in the courts. But the sanction that is now in place blocks them from paying that money to him. You know, and so what I say is, well, you know, the good news for Bidzin Ivanishvili is, yeah, they stole your money and you are entitled to get it back, except that you made the mistake of serving Russian interests in Georgia. And we all know what they have been doing and what this government has been doing, and that it was perfectly reasonable for the United States to say that what the Georgian Dream government has been doing in this country in terms of undermining the elections, in terms of undermining democracy, the human rights violations, their position on the Ukraine war, which is directly contrary to EU and US foreign policy. So if he wanted to get his money back from Credit Suisse and Julius Baer, then he shouldn't have been helping Russia to recapture Georgia, because that's why he is sanctioned, and that's why he's not getting his money.
Yeah, exactly. Back to the executive order. This order also extends on the immediate family, right?
Yes,
and
to
family members.
Yeah, to his wife and to his adult children. The executive order explicitly says in one of its provisions that that a person who is, that the definition of a person sanctioned under this executive order includes the spouse and adult children, spouse or adult child of any person who's covered by this order. Yes.
Like suing Julius Baer, why you have extended it on my family members is no case.
He has no case against Julius Baer. Julius Baer is complying with U.S. sanctions by not paying him out his money. Credit Suisse is also complying with U.S. sanctions by not paying him out his money, and they can't pay it to his wife, and they can't pay it to his children. And I don't know the details of his deposits and his assets with the banks. I understand that it was essentially a trust, and he was the trustee, which probably makes his wife and adult children, this is getting very legal, I know, but it probably makes his wife and his adult children beneficiaries of that trust. So it isn't just that they can't pay the money to Bidzina, who was both a trustee and a beneficiary of the trust. They also can't pay it to his wife and adult children, but who were beneficiaries of the trust. The same is going to be the case with Julius Baer. And there is no question that under the laws of Switzerland, under the laws of Singapore, under the laws of Bermuda, any other jurisdiction that's involved here, Credit Suisse can say, gee, I would love to pay him back his money. And Julius Baer can say, I would love to pay him back his money. And yes, he's won court cases in the Bermuda and Singapore entitling him to get the money back, but I can't, because I'm under a U.S. sanction. If I give him his money, it's going to cost us huge damage in the United States. It's going to undermine the solvency of our bank. We are complying with international sanctions by not paying him that money. And again...
And that would be enough.
That's enough. That's a defense. There's no question about that. Swiss banks comply with U.S. sanctions that apply, again, that work in this way, that define as a violation of the sanction a payment by that bank to the sanctioned person. And so then, again, they can then suffer huge losses in the United States that threaten their own solvency, and in the case of Credit Suisse, it's already in deep financial trouble. So the Swiss all these governments would say, yes, that's a defense.
Staying with U.S. sanctions for a moment, do you think these U.S. sanctions could broaden? Because lately what we're seeing in statements, congressman statements, we see that the picture becomes broader for Ivanishvili and GD, because China, because of Iran, and because of closer ties of Georgia with these, especially with these two countries.
Yeah. So, you know, people started to ask me 2 years ago, 3 years ago, why doesn't the U.S. impose sanctions on Bidzin Ivanishvili? And the answer is because you've got to have a really strong legal base to impose sanctions, okay?
Because Bidzina Ivanishvili can sue whoever
Yes,
imposed
he
the
can
sanctions
go to court.
drag the
He is perfectly
US
free.
into the
He is
court
perfectly
process.
free. He has to go to the United States, but he has plenty of money to hire lawyers in the United States and appear in U.S. court. He can go to court in the United States and challenge this sanction and say, I should not be defined as somebody who is helping Russia to undermine democracy and human rights in Georgia, and he can make that challenge. And by the way, people do win cases like that. I don't think he would, but there are certainly cases of non-U.S. citizens who hire their lawyers and they appear in U.S. federal court. They challenge these sanctions, and there are cases of them winning. I don't think Bidzina will win because I am sure that they developed a very strong and a sufficiently strong evidentiary basis to issue this sanction. We have so many different kinds of sanctions, right? The Magnitsky Act, which is directly about human rights, which I think is the one they used against Gomelauri.
Financial sanctions.
Yeah, they picked this one because they knew that this was one that they could defend, that he can afford to challenge it in U.S. court. He might challenge it in U.S. court. And if the U.S. Justice Department has to defend this sanction in U.S. court, they're certain that they can defend it. So when you talk about Iran and you talk about China, what we see with Iran and China is all kinds of collaboration. Has it gotten to the point where it violates U.S. sanctions against Iran? Has it gotten to the point where it violates U.S. sanctions against China? I can't say that. I don't know. So to me, that's more of a political issue. And that's the way, for example, Congressman Joe Wilson in the United States is playing it, rightly so, as a political issue. He's saying, you know, he's a congressman, he's not acting specifically as a lawyer. He can say, you know, look, there may not be enough to sanction these guys for their relationship with Iran or for their relationship with China, but it sure is not good for the United States, and it's not good for U.S. policy, and therefore we should not treat Georgia as an ally. And we should recognize, so this is a political level discussion. So that's how I would put it, which is that it's very easy, and I think absolutely fair, to embarrass the Georgian government politically and to criticize the Georgian government politically for its collaboration with the terrorist regime in Iran and for the extent to which that it is working to build relationships with China, which is not consistent with U.S. foreign policy. But I doubt that they don't have evidence yet that that is worthy of a sanction. They brought this sanction because I think they knew it was one that they could legally defend in court.
Let's now move with the British sanctions, because it worries Ivanishvili, and we
clearly,
can see
yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Is he scared?
Yeah, of course he is, and yes, he is. And I also I didn't know off the top of my head why he was more worried about British sanctions and why they had such a stronger reaction about the British sanctions than they did about the American one.
Did you find an answer to that?
Yes, and actually I want to give credit to our dear friends at Transparency International Georgia. All of Bidzina's assets, practically all of them, are held by offshore companies that are registered in the British Virgin Islands, okay? And one thing that I didn't know, and that I thank TI for, is that the British Virgin Islands, as well as I think the Cayman Islands, these are still crown possessions of Great Britain. So even though they are kind of self-governed and they have a certain amount of autonomy, British sanctions apply directly to them. You can go to the website of the Financial Authority, I did it today, of the Financial Authority of the British Virgin Islands, and it says, we apply UK sanctions. So they're warning investors, because they have always, of course, welcomed investors, they've welcomed dirty money, they've welcomed money laundering, but they have a certain amount of rules, and they say, yes, and they say, anybody covered by British sanctions, your assets are going to be seized. The U.S. sanction is hugely painful to Ivanishvili. The amount of money that he has now been awarded by the Singapore court and the Bermuda court is around $900 million. It's hard to figure out when you read about it because the amounts have changed and they've been reduced, they've been increased, they've all of that. But as best I can figure out, Credit Suisse owes Bizine Ivanishvili about $900 million, okay? And the courts have ruled in Singapore and Bermuda that they owe him about $900 million, and he can't get that money. And even for Bizine Ivanishvili, $900 million is a heck of a lot of money. That's about 1/4 or 1/5 of his wealth, as I understand it right now. And then in addition, what was in Julius Baer's hands, and I don't know how much that is, let's say it's a couple of $100 million, that money is now frozen by the U.S. sanctions. So the U.S. sanctions are very painful to Bizine Ivanishvili. Maybe he thinks that, oh, because I won the court cases, you know, and I have a legal entitlement under the court cases to this money, maybe he thinks that one of these days I'm going to get it or somehow I'm going to get it. But for right now, he is blocked by the U.S. sanction. So the U.S. sanction is definitely painful to him, but again, the British sanction would be even worse because he's organized all of his companies in the British Virgin Islands. Also, I would not be surprised if he has real estate and other kinds of investments in the UK. The UK and our British friends, for all of their reputation as being the first parliamentary democracy and it's all about law and everything, I'm sorry to say that Britain is a favored place for money laundering and investment by sanctioned people, usually through real estate and things like that. That's why you've had so many Russian oligarchs and people who've, this is kind of a well-known fact. There's a lot of British investigative journalists who write on the amount of money laundering that goes on in London, the amount of real estate and assets that are owned in the UK by people who've been sanctioned by other countries, okay? So I suspect that it's not only about his BVI companies. I would bet that he's got property in the UK and other investments in the UK that he's worried about.
What does he see at this point as the way out? He's not thinking about the new elections, definitely, and we can see that. But
that's what he should do.
What does he see? I mean, do you think these recent movements that he has started, like UTA having this new holding, ATU holding, also Ekaterina Khvedelidze, also
who's his wife?
Yeah, his wife.
So that's not going to work.
I mean, what can he do not for this property and for this money not to be traced?
Under the U.S. sanctions, that will not work because U.S. law always, and it's a very general principle of U.S. law. I wish it was true in Georgia, it's not, but it's a very general principle of U.S. law that if somebody transfers assets or transfers money to avoid a debt, to avoid a legal liability, a criminal liability, it doesn't work. The court will say, that was your money. We don't recognize the validity of that transaction. So, and I don't think, as far as, again, I don't know all the details of the trust. I know that the Singapore thing is a trust. The Bermuda thing was some sort of an insurance trust or insurance policy. But I think that money is so tied up in the bank that I don't see how he would be able to transfer it, He may be able to, I don't know if he has in mind doing that with his BVI companies. That maybe is what he has in mind, is that he can transfer the ownership of the BVI companies to cousins or people who are not, like I said, the sanctions are going to cover the immediate family, wife and adult children.
He's doing that already.
Yeah, so he's probably thinking that he can get around it that way. That will not help him with the U.S. sanctions. I doubt it will help him with the British sanctions because both the U.S. and Britain have a common law concept called fraudulent conveyance, which is when you give your assets to somebody else to defraud a creditor, to trick a creditor, or to trick a criminal liability. Both the U.S. and the UK have that legal concept. So I don't really see how that's probably not going to help him he is not, I have to tell you, he is not a very sophisticated person.
Yeah, wasn't he ready for this? Yes, that was.
He is it's very interesting. Ivanishvili is a very shrewd person in a kind of calculating way, but he is not a very sophisticated person when it comes to understanding international relations, when it comes to understanding international banking, when it comes to understanding international law and how it works. And so he probably thinks that, the same way that he could, if he wanted to transfer his house in Chorvila, to his cousin to get away from a creditor, and that's enough to avoid the Georgian court. Well, sure, that'll work in Switzerland, won't it? No, it's not going to work in Switzerland. What works in Chorvila does not necessarily work in Switzerland.
Is Bidzina Ivanishvili already making mistakes because of all this pressure?
No, I think he's made enormous mistakes. He's made huge mistakes. Why did he? It's all very strange. I mean, as to why he went so completely in the direction of the Russians and why he became such a direct servant of Russian policy in the Caucasus and in Georgia. And of course we all know from our friends who will say, oh well, he was a KGB agent from the very beginning, or there's this and that. I tend to look at what we can see and what we can figure out, and it seems to me that one of the things that really set him off about the West and filled his head with conspiracy theories was exactly this Credit Suisse situation. That and this again goes to his lack of sophistication, his lack of understanding of the way the world actually works.
This is what we have been hearing from George Kvanchilashvili.
Yes,
as well.
yes, and I've also heard it from other people who were in his circle and who worked for him. I can't really discuss it, but I also know it myself. First of all, Bidzina Ivanishvili was never able for a long time to do business with any Western financial institution because the source of his money was unknown. He was seen as a reputational risk. Then he became a politically exposed person. So under normal banking practices in the EU and the United States, he couldn't do business with those banks because there's know your client, KYC, anti-money laundering laws.
Transparency.
I know for a fact he could not clear those obstacles. It's interesting how he eventually did and managed to have accounts, in the West and all of that. But what I think happened, and I understand this as well from some of the people who worked with him, is that Credit Suisse began to have. First of all, Credit Suisse was simply trying to hold on to the money because they were going bankrupt and they didn't want to pay it back to him. But they also had reputational concerns. He's a politically exposed person, the anti-money laundering stuff, the war in Ukraine, the sanctions that are developing. And banks have full discretion to freeze your account based on their judgment that, hey, I don't know where your money came from. God forbid, but TBC Bank or Bank of Georgia could say to me, okay, Ted, we don't know where your money came from. We're now suspicious of you. Your account is frozen. And they don't have to prove anything to me. American banks do it all the time with people. So what happened was they used regular banking practices and rules to say this guy's reputational risks are getting too serious for us, even before there were sanctions against him, okay? And he saw that as a plot. He saw that as a Western. He saw that as a Western conspiracy against him, which of course is ridiculous because the last country in the world that is going to allow its banking system to cooperate with NATO policy on Ukraine is Switzerland. They're neutral, and they always have been, and their banks have always been, a place to hide money away from politics. They've always played that role. They played that role in World War II. How much Nazi money did they hold in World War II? How much stolen Jewish money did they hold in World War II? So I mean, this is the last country in the world that was going to cooperate in a NATO or EU or U.S. foreign policy program about Ukraine and the global war party, whatever the hell that is Switzerland. So, but it seems that he was absolutely convinced that this is what was going on, and it drove him crazy. And what people have to understand about Bidzina Ivanishvili is the bottom line is the man is like a lot of people who are that wealthy, he's greedy. And what he cared about was his money.
Since I mentioned Kvanchilashvili, what do you think his case with Ivanishvili should tell or already tells those businesses who were labeled as Ivanishvili's enablers on the new sanction list?
So I have not gotten into the details of Kvanchilashvili's case. I know it has to do with this Bitcoin transaction, which is complicated. The only thing I can say is that it seems like anything with cryptocurrency ends up in fraud of one kind or another, and this to me looks like another example of a typical kind of. So I'm not really up to speed on it. I'm glad that George Kvanchilashvili eventually came around to realize the nature of the person he was working for, but he only came around to that when it affected him personally. It's too bad he didn't realize it before. Yeah, I think it's generally speaking a good list of businesses and individuals who have enabled him. Some of them are government officials, police officials, and then some of them are business community people. Can you sanction a business person who loves the Georgian Dream government? Well, probably not. That's their political opinion. Can you sanction a business that is deeply and integrally involved in the government's program of political repression and pro-Russian propaganda? Yes. And if I were Irakli Rukhadze, I'd be very worried about that right now. Because of the people on that list, of the business people on that list, if you ask me, the person who is most in the crosshairs for sanctions is him, because of his integral role in as the owner of Imedi TV in the propaganda. And you look at this executive order and enabling Russian policy, enabling Russian propaganda and everything, which is what Irakli Rukhadze does through Imedi TV, is something he can be sanctioned for.
Even when he is a citizen of the U.S.?
Doesn't matter. He can be sanctioned even though he's a citizen of the United States. It gives him stronger rights to challenge the sanction. I was saying before that a non-citizen, as a U.S. citizen, he will have stronger constitutional rights in a case to challenge the sanctions. So he would be in a better position going into federal court in the United States to challenge a sanction against him than Bidzina would. The U.S. law and the U.S. Constitution, just like in most countries, we don't have to be as nice and recognize as many rights to a non-citizen as we do to a citizen. Irakli, as a citizen, would have more rights in challenging a sanction against him. But of the people on that list, and the ones who I know, he is the person who ought to be most worried, because he is most deeply integrated into the functioning of a government that is already defined as assisting Russian foreign policy in undermining democracy in Georgia, undermining human rights. Other people on that list, I know a few of them. I think they absolutely deserve to be on that list. I think they should be ashamed.
Is there anyone who doesn't deserve, in your opinion?
Yeah, what I would say is, I don't know what was behind that list and how it came about, but when I looked at that list, the name that stuck out to me is like, why is he on there, was Irakli Gilaudi. Okay, it's like when
everyone.
Yeah, it's like when you're in school and they give you like a list of things, which one doesn't belong here. It was like, why is he there? Okay, because I would not have put him in the same category. I've never heard him, maybe other people have, I've never even heard him be really a vocal advocate for this government. have they been involved in, and also here he hasn't been in control of Bank of Georgia for years. He's not been an officer of Bank of Georgia nor a board member of Bank of Georgia for many years. He's still a significant shareholder, but he in no way, as far as I know, is in a position to control policy at Bank of Georgia. You know, did Bank of Georgia finance some of Bidzina's projects or things like that? If they did, I don't know about it. I mean, I'm not sure. But even if they did, I'm not sure that that can be pinned on Irakli. I almost think that, maybe somebody who doesn't like him personally. I don't know. So to me, he's the one person that's strange. But I mean, you look, for example, at a company like Wissal Group, the Fakadzes. They've done a lot to support this government. I mean, and to back up this government, defend this government, statements that they made, and they make their living off of U.S. brands. Wendy's, Dunkin' Donuts, all of these American brands and products. That's how they've gotten rich. And here they are enabling an anti-American government. And I think it's disgusting. At least Timur Chonia, who is also the owner of some very important American brands, McDonald's and Coca-Cola, Chonia is pro-Western, and nobody can say a thing about that, that he's abused all the advantages that he's gotten from the United States. No, he's been consistent. I mean, whereas I look at Wissal and the Fakadzes, and U.S. brands and U.S. relationships have made them rich, and here they are supporting a government that's a tool of Russian foreign policy.
Just to sum up this part of the enablers, what is the wiser strategy at this point, to stay loyalist to Ivanishvili or to try to avoid international sanctions? And how can they not see what's coming?
So, first of all, being the naive, idealistic person I am, still after all of these years, it is amazing to me that these people in the business community have not already done more to oppose this government on the grounds of their beliefs and their morals, because many of them have received benefits from the West. They know that this country, they all claim to be patriots and Georgian patriots. They know that this country's history for hundreds of years was to be a part of the West. How could they stand by and watch this government destroy its relations with the West and hook itself to Russia, China, and Iran? How could they do that? I don't understand it. And I know many of them personally, and I'm just still amazed by that. And I guess I'm naive because they see it, people will do anything for money, I guess, or some people will do anything for money. And so a lot of them are simply, it's about money. And they don't seem to get the idea that if they would group together, because if you ask them what's their personal opinions, I don't like this anti-Western stuff, they don't like it, they don't agree with it. But I have to protect my company. The Georgian government can retaliate. There's all of these kinds of considerations. But if they all banded together, if they really all stood up together and said, we are not going to allow the country's future and this country's historic mission and desire and dream to be a part of the West, we're not going to let it be sold out. And if they had, so to me...
They are together in BAG.
They're together in BAG, so
yes.
Why don't they as BAG stand together and say, we're not going to go along with this, that you've got to, essentially they throw down the gauntlet. They put down an ultimatum.
What is very interesting there, that even those businesses that have signed the petition on Free Business G and are also part of the BAG,
yes, and
they also were for not issuing any statement in the name of the BAG, because they're saying, this is a lobbyist association, we need some voice. Yeah.
That's exactly why they should do it. In fact, I would have done it the opposite. And most American companies, in fact, do it the opposite way. So we have, of course, enormous business associations in the United States, the National Association of Manufacturers, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, okay? Normally, exactly because no individual business wants to suffer the penalty of taking a public policy position against the government, they put it to the association where they have collective power and where the retaliation won't come down against any one company in particular. Now, AmCham has done that. AmCham has made a statement as a business association, and I was on the AmCham board for 10 years, and I'm sure that's exactly what the thinking was for AmCham members was they would rather see the business association make the statement on their behalf rather than them doing it personally and have the financial police in their office the next day, you know? So I really, it's difficult to understand. So the point being, you know, it shouldn't be the threat of sanctions that makes Soso Fakadze criticize this government and stand against it. It shouldn't be the threat of a sanction against him. It should be his own moral desire as a Georgian to develop this country. And of course, we all know that this country develops in a relationship with the West, not in a relationship with Russia.
Just to start to wrap up our conversation, what does everything that we have talked about during this interview pose for the investment environment, business environment, economy in 2025?
I'm like, nachevar pensiaze now, right? I mean, I'm not, I'm not as involved in business on a day-to-day basis as I was, but of course my friends are. And the business environment seems to be very bad right now. I mean, I've just had a couple of meetings in the last couple of days with people who are more in the business service sector. But the business service sector is a good indication of the broad economy. I'm talking about law firms, accounting firms, engineering and consulting firms, these kinds of businesses, right? Because they are doing service for construction projects, investments, new, and the word is that investments and projects are suspended. Mm-hmm. And that's the feedback, that I get. As far as, everything I can see personally tends to support that. What I see is that the hotels are empty. What I see is that there's less traffic, which is nice. The airport is a lot less crowded than it used to be. I thought it was interesting that when the Prime Minister, the so-called Prime Minister, had a meeting with members of the business community, one of the most outspoken people criticizing the current situation was the head of the airport, or who said that, I run an airport. I don't care about politics, but I run an airport, and as long as this goes on, we're in deep trouble, So it's clear that the economy is stalled. This is not an abstract discussion. I mean, this is about whether there will be jobs for people in Georgia. This is about whether roads will be built, bridges will be built, whether schools will be built, whether there's going to be development here. Is this going to be some crappy little colony of Russia? Is it going to look like, Abkhazia and South Ossetia, which is what a future with Russia is going to deliver to this country? Or is it going to look like Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania and, be a country that develops? So, I mean, this is absolutely about jobs. And it frustrates me that our friends in the opposition political parties do not focus on that issue, okay? It is not only about people who get beaten up and arrested. I got beaten up and arrested, okay? I have a personal, interest in that question. But it's not only about that. It's about whether people in Achal Tzichay and Batumi and Gori and all these, in Tbilisi and in the Garu Nebi of Tbilisi, whether they're going to have jobs, and are they going to have be able to travel to Europe, and are they going to have money? This government is destroying the country economically. They are absolutely destroying it economically, and it is very clear. And they're destroying it economically by not resolving the political situation. All they have to do to resolve the political situation is conduct new elections. okay? Why they don't just say, okay, fine, let's resolve this, let's pull together for the future of Georgia and have new elections.
Do you think these problems with the business environment, stalled businesses, all that could also slowly feed into fiscal problems as well?
Of course, it has to be.
I will tell you why I'm asking that.
Yes, it has to, because it feeds into it two ways. One is that the tax revenues have to be declining. Tax revenues have to be declining. The tourism is down, investment is down, turnover is down, so it has to be affecting the amount of money that the government is taking in taxes. So the government has less money from taxes. And secondly, all of the foreign aid support programs are being shut off. And Georgia has depended entirely on World Bank money, EBRD, IFC, Asian, all of these international financial institutions to build roads, bridges, schools. That has all been from outside.
And additional investments that came with that
exactly,
because
from the private
these
sector.
donors were there.
That's right. People who were reassured by that. All of that's dead now. All of that's cut off. Nothing is going forward. And so the government's got to be absolutely choked. The U.S. is not giving government support anymore, support to the government. The Germans aren't. Essentially, I think everybody has cut it off.
My last question, and let's leave this for the further discussion because probably future will show us more. Do you think this threat of fiscal problems as well is what's driving the Georgian government today? Because we saw this article in Reuters where Vice Deputy Finance Minister is already talking about the future program with the IMF.
Yes, and it's a sure sign that they have revenue problems when they turn back to the IMF, right? And I've witnessed that over many years here. And they're going to have I think they're going to have a problem with the IMF because the United States and the Western Alliance can block any new programs to Georgia. And I think they would be likely to do that. Even though if Georgia got support from China, if it got support from Russia in the IMF, it's not enough. It's not the U.S. and the Western Alliance, along with its other allies, Japan, Korea, major economies, I think would be able to block any new funding from the IMF, and it seems that they would be likely to do that. So as you mentioned, there's economic reform issues, the partnership fund, the state-owned enterprises, the disaster that has become the national bank under Natia Turneva. There are many economic and reform reasons why the IMF could say, well, we're not going to disperse the money to Georgia right now or do a new program because they have failed on the economic indicators.
Let's see what happens then. Thank you for your time.
Yes, thank you.
The Checkpoints is presented by pharmaceutical company GM Pharma.